Hi there, and thank you so very much for signing up for my course about self-esteem. I'm TJ Guttormson, and since 2009, I've had the pleasure and honor of being a coach, public speaker, and educator for tens of thousands of people from all around the world. And I've spent most of that time helping people connect better, both with others and themselves. Needless to say, healthy self-esteem is important for both of those things. Now, I know, or at least I hope, that you are eager to get started, so I'm going to keep my introduction short. But it does tend to be valuable for people to know just a little bit about who I am and where the things that I teach come from. I'm originally from a small town in northern Norway, which is why you might notice a slight accent and probably more than a couple of grammatical mistakes as we go. But a few years ago, I moved to Las Vegas, where I now live. I grew up as a shy, timid, and insecure person. And I often felt that no matter what I did and no matter what I achieved, whether it was in school, sports, hobbies, that I just wasn't good enough. And it wasn't until a couple of years into college that I started to realize that this feeling wasn't coming from any external success or lack thereof, but from inside of myself. So alongside my academic studies, I started studying personal growth, and I became addicted. It took over my life to such an extent that I added psychology as a second major to my bachelor's degree. And when I was done with that, I pursued an advanced teaching degree in psychology and finally a master's in education. To make a long story short, that obsession turned into a profession. It started with me helping friends and acquaintances who had seen the changes that I had made in my life and wanted some of the same. Then I was invited to give talks. And before I knew it, I was teaching workshops, doing personal coaching, and standing on stages in front of people all over the place. And now I'm lucky enough to have you watch one of my online courses, and I truly hope it will give you what you're looking for. Now, this course itself is separated into three primary segments. The first segment is about letting go of the things that are holding you back from the self-esteem that you want. In this part of the course, we'll talk about things like where our emotions and beliefs really come from, how to change those beliefs, how to silence your inner self-critic, how to overcome learned helplessness, how to change the future, and more. In the second segment, after we've gotten rid of the obstacles that might have been holding you back, we'll talk about how you can create a more healthy self-esteem in ways that you might not have been aware of before. Now, this part of the course is a big one, with too many topics to list even half of them, but some of my personal favorites include expectation management, getting to truly know yourself, how to let go of negative experiences, how to live in integrity, and a handful of my very favorite self-esteem exercises. And in the last of the primary segments, I'll share a whole laundry list of healthy self-esteem behaviors with you, like how to self-correct rather than self-criticize, how to handle criticisms from others in a healthy and productive way, how to teach others how to treat you, how to realize that you have nothing to prove, and lots more. I really hope that you're as excited about all of these things as I am. Oh, and to make sure you get the most out of this course, I have a Facebook group where I give personal support basically every day. I also post free content in there regularly and have lots of fun conversations and discussions with its many members. Type fb.tjguttormson.com into your browser and you'll be forwarded to it automatically. Okay, now let's get to the good stuff and start out by discussing where self-esteem comes from and what it really is. This might just help you realize that improving self-esteem might be a lot simpler than most people think. A lot of people confuse self-esteem with other things, and especially with confidence. But these are two different things. Confidence is about what we believe or know we can do, while self-esteem is all about what we think of ourselves. You could say that confidence is I can, while self-esteem is I am. Self-esteem can be and has been defined in many ways. But to make sure we're focusing on the core of what self-esteem is, we're going to stick with two of the most used definitions from psychology. And they say that self-esteem is a favorable or unfavorable attitude toward the self, or to elaborate on it a little more with the second one, the extent to which a person values, approves of, appreciates, prizes, or likes themselves. To make it easy for ourselves, from now on, I'm going to use the word value as a summation of all of these things. So when I say things like how much you value yourself, I'm talking about that entire definition. So please keep that in mind. Now, let me start you out with this simple question. Do you decide how much you value, approve of, appreciate, or like your friends or loved ones based on things like their external success, looks, popularity, or skills? If your answer is yes, please pay extra attention to the later chapters that talk about connecting with the people who are right for you. And if your answer is no, as it is for most people, then please make sure you don't decide how much you value, approve of, appreciate, or like yourself based on things such as external success, looks, popularity, or skills. Because when we really think about it, most of us, including those with low self-esteem, decide how much we value others based on what we think of them as a person, on things like their values and morals, or whether we think their behavior is good or bad. But those are rarely the criteria that people with low self-esteem use to decide how much they value themselves. By the time you finish this course, you'll know how to do two critical things. One, how to stop letting things outside of yourself affect your self-esteem. And two, how you can create healthy self-esteem from within yourself by seeing that you are the kind of person that you would value highly. Because that is the only genuinely healthy place self-esteem comes from. Because the misunderstanding I just pointed out, that we should value ourselves based on other things than what we value our loved ones for, things we might learn from other people, the past, TV, movies, social media, or whatever else, tends to be the biggest obstacle for healthy self-esteem. And when we've removed that misunderstanding, we'll either see that we already are the kind of person we value highly, or see very clearly which changes we can make to become that person. And those changes won't depend on other people or external results. They will only depend on ourselves. Today, your thoughts about yourself might be based on external factors, such as how you think other people see you, which external status symbols you feel you're lacking, or maybe even how you were treated in your past. But it's my goal, through easy-to-follow logic, insight, and plenty of exercises, to help you recognize that you don't have to take this kind of low self-esteem thinking seriously, and help you see how you can create healthy self-esteem from within yourself. And just knowing what you now know, that you have the power to create your own self-esteem, often ends up being the most important lesson of them all for many of my clients. One of the big challenges that many people face when they start improving their self-esteem is to be able to let go of their unconscious attachment to the things that are holding them back. If we have believed something for a long time, it can be hard to let go of that belief, even if it's a bad one. And I often see this when I work with those who experience that people in their past, whether it's their parents, previous partners, childhood bullies, or whatever else, are the source of their low self-esteem. Now, I am in no way saying that their past or whatever else it is they believe that their low self-esteem comes from didn't play a part. I am 100% sure that it did. But in order to stop letting our past or other people or whatever else that's holding our self-esteem back, we have to be willing to take the power away from them. And in order to do that, we have to accept the fact that now, as the adult that we are, it is we, ourselves, who make or break our self-esteem. We have to accept the fact that we can take back whatever power we have given our past or external factors and not just seize full control over our own self-esteem, but also full responsibility for it. We'll go deeper into all of this throughout the course, but I mention it now because there's a fairly good chance that you will feel some resistance towards some of the things that you'll hear me say. And when you do, please know that that is a great thing. That resistance comes from the social programming and mental processes that are currently keeping you from experiencing healthy self-esteem. The resistance might feel like it's coming from you, that you know better, that you're sure that I have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's just a trick that your social programming and unconscious mind are playing on you. So if you feel such resistance, please keep watching. Don't fight it and don't give in to it. Just accept that it's there and go on with the course. Because when you do, you are showing your past, your social programming, your low self-esteem thinking that it is no longer in control. And after a little while, you might either feel that resistance fade away, or you'll keep having questions or objections. And if it is the latter, please feel encouraged to reach out to me personally and let me know. I'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions. And if you have any objections to what you're learning, there just might be things that are so unique to you that they require a different approach. And if so, I'll be excited to help you figure out what that is. All right, now let's talk about changing the future. Because while you can change how you think about the past, you can't actually change the past. You can, however, change the future. At this point on my live seminars, people tend to look at me funny and ask what I'm talking about. How can we change the future when it hasn't happened yet? Well, your future might not have happened yet, but there is a way that we can, to a certain extent of course, predict it. Not all the details, and not even the full picture of how it will look. But we can map out a lot of the building blocks for your future and make a pretty good guess at how those building blocks will influence things. And we do that by looking at our habits. Because the things that we do often and regularly are the things that will influence our future the most in most cases. A couple of obvious examples would be that if you have a habit of exercising every day, we can predict that you're likely to be in better shape a few months from now than you are today. If you have a habit of saving a little money every month, we can predict that you'll have more money a year from now than you do today. And if you have a habit of being self-critical and judging yourself negatively, well, let's just say that if you want this course to work, that is a habit that needs to be changed in order to change your future to one with healthy self-esteem. And we will, of course, talk about how to do just that a little bit later. So here's your first exercise from this course. First, think about what you want your future to look like. And to make it more concrete, let's aim for 1 year from now, or 2 at the most. Secondly, make a list of the habits you have today in the areas of your life that are relevant to that future. So if you want a future of good health, list your habit around things like diet and exercise. If you want more financial freedom, list the habits you have around money. And maybe most importantly for us right now, if you want a future of healthy self-esteem, list your habits of how you treat yourself. Once your list is complete, consider whether those habits are likely to lead you closer to where you want to be or further away from it. Any habits you find that are likely to create a different future than the one you want should be changed. And any habit you have that will help you should not just be kept, but prioritized. And if you're not sure how to create habits that will improve your self-esteem just yet, return to this video after watching the rest of this course, and you'll know. To paraphrase the famous quote, your future starts today. So make sure you have habits that are working to create the right one. Oh, and shortly, Udemy will ask you to leave a rating for this course. I know that it's still early, but if you're up for it, I would greatly appreciate it if you left one. A course's rating is the #1 thing that influences whether people sign up for it or not. So your rating is very important to me and highly valued. In fact, I love getting them so much that I personally reply to every single one of them at the start of most of my workdays. And if you happen to change your mind about your rating while you finish the course, Udemy will ask you again at the end if you'd like to change it, so no worries there. So here's what might be one of my potentially controversial claims in this course. Your emotions, including how you feel about yourself, never come from anywhere but your own thoughts. They're not coming from the people around you, from what has happened to you, from what you've done, from what you've been told, or anything like that. That being said, I'm also not claiming that you are the one to create your emotions, because you, your consciousness, are not your thoughts. You're the person experiencing and listening to the thoughts served up to you by your mind. Your mind is the one that creates your thoughts, and it creates lots of them. The thoughts that you are aware of, which we tend to call conscious thoughts, are just the tip of the iceberg, because you have a lot more thinking going on in your unconscious mind, the part of your mind that you don't have direct awareness of and no direct control over. And your unconscious thoughts are so much faster than your conscious thoughts that comparing them to each other would be like comparing a race car to a turtle. And this is why it really does seem like the outside world is what's creating our emotions, at least a lot of the time. Let's say, as an example, that a friend of you criticizes you, and that when you hear what they're saying, you feel bad about yourself and your self-esteem suffers. That feeling isn't actually coming from your friend or even from what they're saying. It's only coming from your thoughts about what they're saying, and mostly your unconscious thoughts, the ones that you have zero direct control over in the moment. Here's how that works. The moment your unconscious mind registers what your friend is saying, it starts processing the words. It might consider whether your friend is being serious or not, whether you should believe what they're saying, whether you care, how you care, what might happen if they're right, what might happen if other people hear what they say, how what they said reflects on your worth, and several other things. And here is something very important. Your unconscious mind considers all of these things based on what its current beliefs are. And it does it all in a split second, before you have time to consciously reflect and think about what your friend said. And after that split second, your unconscious mind lets you, your conscious mind, know what it's thinking. But the problem is that it can't tell you in words because it doesn't really communicate in words. Instead, it sends a signal to your consciousness in the form of an emotion. So a split second after your friend criticizes you, you feel an emotion. And because you haven't had time to consciously think about what they said and decide how you feel about it based on logic, and because you have no direct awareness of all the thinking that just happened in your unconscious mind, the only logical explanation seems to be that the emotion is coming from what your friend just said. And this, by the way, isn't just my interpretation of how things work. This process has been documented in scientific research using things like brain scans. One example is a research article called The Biochemistry of Belief from 2009, where the researchers describe how our experiences move through a filtering process in our brain. They explain that when we experience something, that experience is first processed in areas of our brain associated with emotions and beliefs. And then information of it travels from there to our frontal lobes, which is where our conscious awareness is. The researchers go on to say that which part of this information we become consciously aware of is determined by the beliefs that the experience is filtered through. So in other words, your friend does not beam sadness or anger or low self-esteem into you through their words. Your friend might even be expecting you to appreciate what they're saying because they're doing it to help you. They might hope or expect that you'll feel loved, respected, or supported by the fact that they're being honest with you in this attempt to help. In fact, I'm guessing that you've also had experiences where you did or said something that someone else interpreted and reacted to in a very different way than what you intended, right? So the emotion isn't coming from your friend or from their words. It's coming from your own mind, from the filtering and interpretations that happen in your unconscious before you've had time to consciously process anything. But why is this important? Especially if our emotions are coming from a part of our mind that we don't have any direct control over anyway. Doesn't that make us just as much a victim to the emotions that damage our self-esteem as if they were coming from the external world? Well, only if we believe that we're a helpless victim. Only if we think that the external world, other people, our results, our past, or other such things have to change in order for us to feel differently about ourselves. The world doesn't have to change. The only thing that has to change is your thinking and your beliefs. And those researchers that I mentioned go on to say that when we choose to change our thoughts, we become open and receptive to other pieces of information that was previously blocked by our beliefs. When we change our thinking, we change our beliefs. And of course, when our beliefs change, the things we experience will be filtered and interpreted in new ways. So when we change our beliefs to support our self-esteem rather than hold it back, the emotions our unconscious sends to our conscious will start being far more positive, supporting, and helpful. Of course, that's pretty easy for me to say and not always that easy to do, especially since the habitual thoughts that we need to change happen so fast that we don't have time to react to them. And in a part of our mind, nonetheless, that we have no direct access to. But by patiently working on our thinking and habits over time, with the help of what you're learning in this course, you will change your unhelpful beliefs and habitual thoughts to helpful ones. And for the record, by recognizing that your self-esteem and your emotions are created from within yourself, you've taken one of the most important steps towards that goal. Because that acceptance gives your mind the power and influence it needs to get rid of the obstacles that are keeping you from experiencing the healthy self-esteem that you were born with. You probably don't remember, but you, just like everyone else on this planet, was born with healthy self-esteem. Just look at any infant. Watch how they behave and how they interact with the world. How many of them show signs of low self-esteem? The answer is none, because their brain has not yet developed the areas needed for them to reflect on themselves. They have no thoughts about themselves as a person, and that means that they'll act in the ways we all do when we don't have any faulty beliefs that are suppressing our innate, healthy self-esteem. They'll ask for what they want, they'll do what they want, they'll feel good about themselves. It's not until kids are somewhere around 2 to 3 years old that what's called the medial prefrontal cortex develops enough in their brain for them to start having a proper sense of self. But it will take another couple of years before it's developed enough for most children to truly start to understand that two people might see things in different ways. And this is called perspective taking in psychology. And according to experts in the field, for many, this is when negative changes to our innate, healthy self-esteem can start to happen. At this age, we both have a sense of ourselves and now an ability to reflect on who and how we are. And we understand that other people might have different thoughts about who and how we are. When this is combined with the misunderstanding that how we feel, including how we feel about ourselves, comes from the outside world, we start creating beliefs about ourselves based on the behaviors of others, media, culture, religion, and whatever else. And keep in mind that when I say other people, it doesn't have to be anyone in particular, like your parents or teachers. Someone can have wonderful, loving, encouraging, and supporting parents, I know I did, but still internalize bad beliefs from friends or peer groups or TV or the internet and social media or so on. And by the time we reach adolescence, our judgments about ourselves have usually become fairly solid beliefs in our unconscious mind. But any belief, no matter how solid it is, can be changed if we're willing to change it. Because that healthy self-esteem that we were born with, that's still there, ready to be set free. And for some people, it's not just ready, it is eager and desperate to come out and play. And I can say with a lot of confidence that you are likely one of those people, or you wouldn't be watching this course. But I'm telling you this for more reasons than to compliment you. I'm telling you this because it's important for you to know that no matter how your self-esteem is today, it was once exactly what it should be. And I want you to know that your mind knows how to create healthy self-esteem again. All it needs is for you to be willing to let go of any thoughts or beliefs that might be telling you otherwise and holding you back. You already have all the self-esteem you need. It's just hidden behind beliefs that aren't true and misunderstandings that tell you that it's not there or that it comes from anywhere but yourself. Self-image is a term we use for how we see ourselves or how we describe ourselves both to ourselves and other people. We also know that our unconscious mind, that part of our brain we've been talking about that we have no direct awareness of or control over, believes the things that we tell it over and over again. That means that whichever words or phrases we use to describe ourselves the most often, both in our own mind and through the words that we speak out loud, is what our unconscious believe that we are. It becomes our unconscious self-image. And that becomes one of the beliefs that our unconscious interprets our experiences through. To simplify this, if you think of yourself as an unlikable person, your unconscious mind will interpret your experiences through that filter. So if someone tells you that they like you, your unconscious is much more likely to interpret that as a lie and make you feel uncomfortable or offended by it than it is to interpret it as the truth and let you feel good about it. So if you want your unconscious mind to improve your self-esteem rather than reduce it, you should make sure to update the ways you think of and describe yourself to something that will be much more supportive and helpful. When you do that, you start to create a new, more healthy self-image. Now, the truth is that this might take a little time, and it will definitely take some effort. But once you're done, your unconscious mind will start to encourage and push you to live up to those new, improved beliefs. And that includes things such as serving up positive emotions about yourself and your experiences more often, making you excited about your challenges, and creating more motivation and resilience in the face of obstacles and temporary failure. But what is the best way to improve our self-image? How can we change the habitual way we describe ourselves in the best way? Well, in all the years that I've studied, practiced, and taught this stuff, I've come across many techniques and approaches to it. Some swear by daily affirmations, some find it useful to keep challenging their beliefs, others believe in hypnosis, visualization, positive reinforcement, and so on. But whichever approach people choose, there is one common element that everyone who succeeds at changing their self-image seems to share. They make the change believable for their unconscious mind. And the way to do that is to create our new self-image in stages rather than to try to jump from one extreme to the other. So if Mark wants to change his self-image from I'm insecure to I'm comfortable with myself, it won't be ideal for him to just switch those out with each other. Instead, he should tell himself something that is more believable, something that more easily could be true. So he might change I'm insecure to I'm becoming more comfortable with myself. This will be much easier to accept because it's perfectly realistic to feel insecure while becoming more comfortable, but feeling insecure while being fully comfortable doesn't make much sense, so the thought will usually be rejected by our mind. And once his unconscious accepts that he is becoming more comfortable with himself, it will more often encourage him to do things today that he would have been too insecure to do yesterday. So your exercise here is simple. Make a list of the most common words you use to describe yourself, both to yourself and to others. And when you're done, take a look at which of those words aren't helping you, which might be holding you back, which might be reducing your self-esteem. Once you've identified them, choose one or two of them to start with and start replacing them with something more helpful and positive, something that tells you that you are becoming more of what you'd like to be. Keep repeating this new description of yourself as often as you can. Do it randomly throughout your day in your own thoughts. Do it out loud whenever you describe yourself to other people. And especially do it when you're doing something that is relevant to your new self-image. And please recognize that by doing this exercise, which is designed to help you become more of what you want to be, you're making the words you tell yourself absolutely true. Once you start feeling the effect in the one or two areas that you've started out with, and notice that this new description of yourself pops up in your mind on its own more often than the old one, you can go back to your list and pick one or two more things to work on. And when you suddenly start to feel like the word becoming no longer fits because you now actually are, you have successfully updated that part of your self-image to something much more helpful. One of the things that our past has created for basically all of us, and that for some of us have had a negative effect on our self-esteem, is what's called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is a concept that has been studied for a long time. As early as in 1967, the psychologist Martin Seligman did some admittedly not very nice research on it that has since been used as a prime example of this phenomenon. Dr. Seligman placed 3 groups of dogs in harnesses. Group 1 were put in pairs and held in the harness for a bit and then let go. The dogs from group 2 and 3 were put together in pairs, 1 dog from group 2 and 1 dog from group 3, with a lever on the floor each. Then they were given light but uncomfortable electric shocks at random times. I know, I said it wasn't very nice. The dogs from group 2 could stop the electric shocks by pressing down on their lever. But the lever for the dogs from group 3 did not work, and their shocks only stopped when dog from group 2 hit their lever. The dogs from group 2 quickly learned that they could make the uncomfortable feeling stop whenever they wanted, while the dogs in group 3 experienced that the shocks started and stopped randomly and there was nothing they could do about it. Then, in part 2 of the experiment, Seligman placed these same dogs in a big rectangular box with a low barrier in the middle. The side the dogs were put in first would randomly give the dogs the same electric shock, but this time it could be escaped by jumping over the barrier to the other side. And this time, the dogs from all 3 groups could escape. What Seligman found was that the dogs from group 1 and 2 quickly figured out how to escape the electric shock and would simply jump the barrier as soon as the pain started. Most of the dogs from group 3, however, who had learned earlier that there was nothing they could do to stop the pain, simply lay down and whined, waiting for the pain to stop on its own. They had learned that they were helpless to escape the pain because the things they had tried in the past hadn't worked. So now they didn't even see any point in trying, even though their circumstances had changed. And research has shown us that learned helplessness is just as common among us humans as it was among those dogs. All of us seem to have a point at which we simply decide that something isn't for us, or that we'll never be able to, or that there's no point because I've already tried. But with the exception of things that are physically impossible for us to do, the truth is that most things are perfectly doable with the right experience, knowledge, or tools. So why is this relevant for our self-esteem if our self-esteem is about how we value ourselves as a person and not so much about the actions we take or the things we can do? Well, it's relevant because learned helplessness can also manifest itself in the belief that there's no reason to value ourselves highly if we believe or experience that other people don't. But this, of course, is nothing more than another misunderstanding. Actually, it's a combination of 2 misunderstandings. Namely, the misunderstanding that our self-esteem has to be controlled by the past or other people's thoughts about or treatments of us, and the misunderstanding that our feelings, including our feelings for ourselves, come from outside of ourselves. Someone with healthy self-esteem tend not to concern themselves very much with what other people think of them, especially not the people that they shouldn't be listening to anyway, and that includes the vast majority of people, but we'll get to that in a little bit. They recognize that valuing themselves highly, regardless of what other people think of them, is not just possible, but a critical part of weeding out the people from their lives who can't see their true worth and attracting those who will. Later, we'll talk more about high self-esteem behaviors that will help us achieve both of these things. But for now, here's the good news. All we need in order to break free from our learned helplessness is 2 things. The first we've already talked about, the willingness to let go of the beliefs that are causing it. And the second is new experience, knowledge, or skills. And here's the even better news. We acquire new experience, knowledge, and skills every single day, often without even realizing it. Just by watching this course, you're acquiring tons of new knowledge, ideas, and experience, and by doing the exercises that I share with you, you multiply all of those things. So, here's your exercise that will help you break free from any learned helplessness that you might have. Whenever you think to yourself that there's no point in doing something because you've tried and failed in the past, take a moment to consider whether you've grown or learned anything at all since then. And here's the kicker. The answer will always be yes. If time has passed since then, you've grown, matured, learned, and experienced lots of things. And even if it's just been a second since you tried and failed, you have learned from that failure. Bill Gates might have said it best when he said, "Failure is the best teacher." Or perhaps it was Thomas Edison when he said something along the lines of, "I have not failed once, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Either way, once you know how something won't work, do it differently next time. And if you keep that up, learned helplessness will never hold you back again. Have you ever been in a crowded place with so many conversations around you that it just sounded like noise, but then suddenly you clearly hear someone say your name in the distance? Or maybe you were completely zoned out, reading or relaxing or napping or something like that, and suddenly you heard your name, and when you turned your attention to the person who said it, they'd been talking to you for a while. Or perhaps you've learned a new word, and suddenly you start to notice that word in conversations, on TV, on social media, and so on. Or maybe you've decided that you want to buy a new thing, and once you decided what you want, you start noticing that thing everywhere. And even if you can't remember any of these experiences, or anything similar to them, how about this? Until I mention it right now, I bet you weren't very aware of what your left pinky toe felt like. But now that I've mentioned it, you're suddenly very aware of it. All of these experiences, and thousands more, happen because of what's called the reticular activating system in our brain. And for convenience sake, I'll be calling it ROS from now on. ROS is involved in several things, but one of its primary tasks is to filter the sensory input that we experience. Sensory input is anything that you experience via your senses. Taste, smell, sound, touch, sight, so on. And we are all constantly bombarded with sensory input. So much of it that if we had to consciously pay attention to all of it, we would probably lose our minds pretty quickly. Because although we're not aware of it, we always hear any sound around us that's loud enough for our ears to pick up. We feel every inch of our body at all times. We see thousands of little details almost anywhere we look. We smell our surroundings and taste whatever's on our tongue all the time, and so on. But the vast majority of that sensory input is not important to us. And that's where ROS comes in. ROS basically blocks anything it considers unimportant information from reaching your conscious awareness. So you don't go around constantly being aware of how your right index finger feels, because that's not important information unless it's uncomfortable, in pain, or someone puts the idea into your head to pay attention to it like I just did. Other things are always a priority for us, because we have programmed ROS to always make us aware of information related to those things. Our name, for example, or something we have an invested interest in, or the smells of things we really like or dislike. But how does ROS decide which information to make us aware of and which not to? Well, it does it in one of two ways. The first is by checking information against our beliefs. When we believe something, ROS will make us aware of anything we experience that supports that belief, and usually try to make sure we don't become aware of things that contradict our beliefs. This makes ROS incredibly important and powerful when it comes to both our self-esteem and our general way of life. But luckily for us, there's a second way to program ROS too. All we have to do is decide that something is important to us, to think about it regularly, and create a habit of giving that thing attention whenever we happen to notice it. When we do, we show ROS that this is information that we would like for it to make us aware of. Let me give you an example of how this can be done, and please use what you learn in this example as your exercise for this chapter. Let's say that Linda has an untrue, low self-esteem belief that tells her that she is a selfish person, and she wants to program ROS to help her change that belief into one that says she's a caring or helpful person. To do this, Linda can start to actively look for experiences that disprove her old belief about being selfish and experiences that will support her new one. Simple way to do this would be for Linda to take a moment a few times a day to think about what she's experienced so far that day and to pay extra attention to all the times she's acted helpfully rather than selfishly. Setting an alarm on her phone at certain times of day is an easy way to remind herself to do this. Once Roz notices that Linda actively looks for things that show her being helpful, it will realize that it's information that's important to her. This will make Roz show that information to Linda whenever it notices it, and not just when Linda is reflecting. So over time, Roz will more and more often make Linda aware of when she's being helpful in the moment that she is. Of course, for this to work, Linda will actually have to do things that fall into the category of being helpful on a regular enough basis. And that's where Roz shows up with a big bonus. Because it won't just be looking for proof that Linda has been helpful, it will also start to look for opportunities for her to be helpful and make her aware of them. Don't get me wrong, this isn't some magic pill where all Linda has to do is think, I want to prove to myself that I'm helpful and not selfish, and then the work is done. Changing our beliefs can take time and almost always requires focused, conscious effort and choices. But with Roz working with you rather than against you, that process becomes a lot easier and a lot quicker. If self-esteem is about how we value, approve of, appreciate, or like ourselves, it should be fairly obvious that whether we think that we're a good person or not becomes very important. And in today's society, there are two words that are often used when we talk about being a good person: morals and ethics. Most people use these words as synonyms, but there is actually a difference between them, and it's a very important one for us. To make the difference easy, we're going to go with how Encyclopedia Britannica explains it. They say that many people think of morality as something that's personal, whereas ethics is the standards of good and bad distinguished by a certain community or social setting. In other words, your morals are what you think of as right and wrong, good or bad, while ethics is what the community or culture around you consider to be right or wrong, good or bad. And here's the important part. Those things won't always be the same, and that's okay. Sometimes what you think is right or wrong won't match up with what the people around you think. And when that happens, a lot of people's self-esteem gets into trouble. This can be on a small scale, such as growing up in a family or having a social circle that has ethics that don't match with your personal morals. Or it can be on a larger scale, such as living in a country with ethics that are different from your morals. In either case, a lot of people start feeling bad about themselves when they realize that some of their morals or beliefs wouldn't be approved of by many of the people around them, or that they don't approve of the ethics they're surrounded by. And when that happens, a lot of people make one of two mistakes. Either they conform to the ethics of the society around them and act in ways that goes against their personal moral code, or they stick to their morals but punish themselves for it by believing that they aren't a good person who they should value since they are unable to agree with society's ethics. Both of these scenarios have a high chance of being destructive for our self-esteem. So instead, we have to become comfortable with our own morals and recognize that if there's a conflict between our personal morals and society's ethics, we can stick to our morals and feel good about it. And the truth is that very often other people won't really even notice. And if they do notice, they rarely care, and they might even agree with you a lot more than you were expecting. Because here's the kicker. The ethics in the society around you isn't what everybody else believes to be right or wrong. It's either the average of other people's personal morals, or more often than not, it's ethics that have been established by cultural leaders in the past that the people around you just aren't publicly disagreeing with. So when your personal morals conflict with society's ethics, odds are that there are lots of people around you whose morals match perfectly with yours. And once you start living by your morals, you'll start to notice who those people are. When that happens, you can more easily create a life surrounded by people whose morals are compatible with yours and move away from those whose morals are so different than yours that any kind of relationship with them wouldn't work. Because we should keep in mind that just like we don't have to violate our personal morals for other people also don't have to violate theirs for us. When we realize that someone in our life has morals or follow ethics that are simply incompatible with ours, it's usually best for both sides to part ways and move on. We're going to talk more about morals and about living in integrity because this is a very important topic for our self-esteem, but here's your first exercise on this topic. Take some time to think about and preferably write down what the ethics you're surrounded and influenced by are, and if there are any of them that don't match your personal morals. What have you been told is right and wrong that doesn't match up with what you, deep down, believe? Are there any ways in which you limit, judge, or punish yourself because your personal morals don't match up with the ethics that surround you? Find these answers, and what you'll learn in the next few videos will be even more helpful. Now that you understand ethics and morals, I have to backtrack a little bit and give you one more chapter about letting go of external influence. And I know I already touched on this, but for most people, it's very helpful to do a bit of a deep dive into just why and how we can't let ethics, or other people's personal morals, tell us anything about our own value or worthiness. Imagine that tomorrow you move to a new country, a strictly religious country that believes that the world was created when a giant blew his nose and we were the goop that came out of it. They also believe that the giant told them that in order to be a good person, you have to throw rocks at your neighbors, and the only thing you're allowed to eat is roasted sheep. Would you feel like a bad person for not nailing the old lady next door in the back of her head with a rock in the morning? Would you judge yourself for having a salad, fish, or maybe even ice cream when you were hungry? I'm gonna bet that you wouldn't. In fact, so far, I have not met a single person who has said that they would. But I have met plenty of people who have pointed out to me that this is a pretty extreme example, that everyone knows that you're not a bad person for not throwing rocks at a grandma. Well, sure. Everyone with our ethics, our morals, do. But those living in giant land don't. Those who grew up there and believe in the giant would genuinely, fully, and wholeheartedly think that rock throwing is the right thing to do. It would likely be a sign of respect, compassion, maybe even love. You might even find that the grandma next door has her feelings hurt if you don't throw rocks at her. And this is what happens to all of us to some extent. We've grown up learning rules and norms, ethics, that seem perfectly reasonable to us regardless of whether they objectively are or not. And they seem reasonable to us because we've always known them, and they've always been there. And that makes it a lot harder to break away from them when we start to develop our own moral codes, when we start to get a sense of who we are and what we believe. And this can happen both on big and small things. A kid might grow up believing that it's important to always be nice to everyone no matter what, because that's what his family and community values and teaches him. But as he gets older, he might recognize that not everyone deserves that treatment. And his morals might tell him that if someone is challenging his boundaries or being aggressive, being nice isn't an honest way for him to interact with them. Another kid might have been told that her elders, such as her parents, should always be listened to and have the final say in what's right for her. But as she grows up, she might recognize that her parents' shortcomings are there and realize that now that she's not a kid anymore, she shouldn't let someone else control her, and that it would feel wrong for her to not be in charge of her own life. And when things like these happen, when we notice that what we believe to be right and wrong differ from what other people might believe, we have to follow our own morals, not external ethics. Because if you wouldn't let someone from the gigantor religion affect how you feel about yourself, why should you let someone from your own society, even those from your own home, make you feel bad about yourself simply because their beliefs are different than yours? We are all entitled to our own personal beliefs, thoughts, and conscience. In fact, that's included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that most countries in the world have subscribed to, and that pretty much everyone you ask will tell you that they support. And when you live by your personal morals, rather than by what you've been taught or forced to live by, you'll live in integrity. And there are, in my experience, few things that are as effective for generating self-esteem as to live a life of integrity. So let's move on and talk about what that looks like and how to do it. Integrity is usually defined as living by one's moral principles. And as we now know, if self-esteem is influenced by whether we think we're a good person or not, living in integrity becomes extremely important. It's simply very hard to feel like a good person if we keep doing things that we feel is wrong. So we have to stop giving in to the things that make us break our moral code, whether it's ethics, peer pressure, fear of judgment, or whatever else. Now, before I go on about this, I have to share a quick disclaimer. Many people around the world, unfortunately, live in places where there is real risk for physical harm, imprisonment, even death, if they break with certain ethical codes. If you are one of them, please make sure you do what you have to in order to stay safe. In this case, I do not have the expertise to tell you how to deal with your specific situation, so all I can say is this: prioritize your health and survival, because simply knowing that you don't have to feel bad about yourself for having morals that conflict with your surroundings will help all on its own, even if you can't always live those morals out safely. And if you are in a situation like this, please look for people knowledgeable about self-esteem who understand your circumstances and seek their advice. Okay, with that said, when it won't mean that we are risking our life and when our actions won't interfere with other people's freedom or health, living in integrity should always be our top priority. Remember this: it is not your obligation to make other people comfortable at the cost of your own integrity. When you act outside of integrity, when you do things that conflict with your personal morals, you are not just doing a disservice to yourself and your self-esteem, but you're also being dishonest with the people around you. Those who do this a lot often end up surrounded by people who just aren't right for them, simply because the people who are right for them never get to see that they are. So let your moral compass guide you. Think about what you think is right and wrong when making decisions, when stating your opinions, when interacting with others. When you can look at yourself and your life and know that you are doing what you know to be morally right, it will become harder and harder not to feel like a good person, like a person that you would value. And that's the whole point, isn't it? So here's an exercise for you to tie all of this together. Look at that list I asked you to make earlier about whether you're surrounded by ethics that differ from your personal morals. Is there anything on that list, big or small, being said or done in your social circles, among your friends, in your family, or wherever else, that you go along with, even though your morals tell you that you shouldn't? If you discover any, take some time to figure out what you feel the morally right thing to do about it is. Do you need to speak up about it to those people? Is it enough not to participate in it anymore? Or is there something else you can do when it happens that will align you with your morals, even if the people around you aren't? When you know what you need to do, start doing it. And if it's too scary at first, you can also break it down into smaller pieces. So if you, for example, feel that it's your moral obligation to stand up to someone's unfair and judgmental treatment of someone else, but the thought of doing it scares you so much that you aren't actually able to go through with it, think about what the first step in the right direction might be. Maybe it is to not participate, or to console the person that has been treated unfairly after the fact, or whatever else that might not live 100% up to your personal moral code, but that will be closer to it than you are today. Then do that thing until you become comfortable enough to take another step in the right direction. We don't have to go from 0 to 100 immediately. Small but steady steps will also get us there. And by following this recipe, you'll live a life of integrity in no time. Okay, one more quick video about morals and integrity, because this is very important to be aware of. To start us off, let me ask you these questions. Do you always treat others the way you think people should be treated? Do you always speak up when you witness something you think is unjust? Do you always contribute to the world around you in the ways that you think people should? And maybe most importantly, do you always treat yourself in the way that you think people should be treated? When you can honestly say that you're acting the way you think it's right to act, it will be almost impossible to not see your own true value. But you might already know that based on everything we've been talking about, so what's my point? My point is that always is a very high bar to set for ourselves. Not just because it's unrealistic to always do everything just right, but also because it's not always that easy to know what the right things to do are, and because very few things, including morals, beliefs, and values, are black and white. We humans and the society we live in are simply more complicated than that. Let me use myself as an example to explain what I mean. Generally speaking, I'd say that I believe that people should be treated with respect and kindness, and I try my best to treat people that way. But sometimes I don't. Sometimes I even consciously choose to treat people differently, and when I do, I don't feel bad about it afterwards. Because while that is my belief, it simply does not apply to everyone no matter what the situation is. Sometimes people might show me that they don't deserve my kindness by acting outside of what I think is right in such a blatant way that I simply no longer respect them. An example of this would be if someone treated someone I love badly on purpose. And that would include treating me badly on purpose, by the way. And these exceptions or gray areas exist within most of our morals and values. And unless we both recognize and accept them, we'll keep holding our self-esteem back for absolutely no reason. While some of these exceptions might be obvious to us from the start, others we'll just have to figure out as we go. And to do that, we have to be curious rather than judgmental when we see ourselves do things that at first glance might not seem to be in integrity. Because if our first reaction is to criticize ourselves when we notice that we act in a way that seems to go against our morals or values, we'll end up criticizing ourselves for lots of things that we simply shouldn't be upset about. So instead, we should train ourselves to explore those situations before we make up our mind about whether we did good or not. So here's your exercise. Whenever in the future you catch yourself doing something that at first glance doesn't seem to be in line with your morals, ask yourself questions about it before you do anything else. Ask yourself why you did what you did and whether it seems morally right based on the circumstances. If the answer you find is that your actions do feel morally right even if they didn't follow your previously held morals perfectly, you've discovered more of your own moral depth. You've discovered a new exception to the rule, and that will help you become better at acting in integrity from now on. Expectation management is a topic that I have included in many of my online courses, but there are few, if any, where setting realistic expectations for ourselves is as important as in this one. Correctly managing our expectations of ourselves is simply a key aspect of healthy self-esteem. You see, having unrealistically high expectations of ourselves is an almost guaranteed way to disappoint or frustrate ourselves. And if we keep disappointing ourselves, we're much more likely to also value ourselves less, which of course is the opposite of what we want to do for our self-esteem. We set expectations of ourselves every day, but most people do it on autopilot without really thinking about it. And when they do that, they tend to set their expectations based on what they want to be able to expect of themselves or what they think other people expect of them. These strategies will very rarely create realistic expectations. Because not only is it rare that we are able to do things the way we dream of doing them, which tends to be perfectly, but our ideas of what other people expect of us is even more often wrong. And even when they're not, they don't matter at all. Who we are, what we do, and how we do it is up to us, not other people. So to not fall into any of these traps, we have to become consciously aware of the expectations we create for ourselves and make sure that we make them realistic. And the only good way to do that is to base our expectations on what our recent past has shown us that we can expect of ourselves. Because how we do things, what we do, and even what and how we are today tend to look very similar to yesterday. For a lot of people, this is simple to understand if we're talking about practical skills. Most people recognize that if they're asked to sing or draw or other such things, they're likely to be about as good at it today as they were yesterday. But we also have to set our expectations in this way for our thinking and our everyday behavior. Let's say, as an example, that our friend Lisa has realized that some of her morals differs from the ethics in her community. One of the things she's discovered is that while the community around her thinks that the right thing to do is tell white lies rather than to say anything that might upset others, Lisa's morals tell her that complete honesty is the only right thing to do. Now, if Lisa spent most of her life telling white lies rather than having honest but potentially uncomfortable conversations, she can't expect that she'll be able to just flip a switch and from that moment on never tell a white lie again. Odds are that the white lies are so much of a habit that she'll sometimes tell them without thinking about it. And since she doesn't have a lot of practice being completely honest all the time, it might even feel uncomfortable and scary to do it at times, and that might make her not be honest in some situations. So if Lisa sets her expectations of herself too high and says that from this moment on she will never tell a white lie again, she is setting an expectation that she has no proof that she'll be able to live up to. It will probably be unrealistic, and she'll likely be disappointed or frustrated with herself the next time she tells a white lie by habit or because it's too scary not to. And that is likely to make her feel bad about herself for not living up to that expectation. So to avoid this, Lisa has to take a moment to think about how often lately she has been able to break her white lie habit and instead speak the uncomfortable truth. And once she knows how often that is, her expectation has to be that that's probably how often she'll be able to do it today too. And if Lisa has never spoken the uncomfortable truth instead of a white lie before, she has to do her best to not set any expectations at all and go out and learn what she can expect of herself by simply trying her best. Now, at this point in my live seminars, people often ask, so are you saying that we shouldn't try to do or be better than what we've done or been in the past? No, not at all. In fact, I'm a huge believer in more or less always trying to do better than we did in the past whenever we're doing anything important. And the way to combine that with realistic expectation management is to manage our ambitions correctly. Let's talk about that in the next video. Firstly, I have to make sure one thing is clear. In this video, I'm talking about our short-term ambitions. In other words, our ambitions for the next time our expectations for ourselves come into play, and not our overall long-term ambitions for life. Clear enough? Great. So ambition management is what we do after we set correct expectations for ourselves. When we know what's realistic to expect, we get to play with how and in which ways we want to improve. But in order for ambition management to be done correctly and to be helpful for our growth, we have to follow two simple rules. Rule number one is, don't be emotionally invested in the ambition. In other words, our ambition should be something we hope for, almost at the same level that we might hope to make a hole-in-one the first time we play golf or something like that. We should absolutely try our best to make it happen. And if it does happen, that'll be amazing and we'll probably feel really great about it. But if it doesn't, we should be able to shrug our shoulders and move on without it disappointing or frustrating us. If you're more attached to your ambition than that, it can change from being an ambition to being an unrealistic expectation. Rule number two is that the ambition must be realistic. In other words, it has to be something that, while better than what we've been able to do in the past, could realistically happen if we just get things a little more right the next time than we did the last time. And there are two ways we can figure out what that is. If we've already worked on this for a while, we can look at what our rate of improvement has been. However fast or slow we've been improving so far is likely the same speed we'll improve at now as long as we keep doing things the same way. Now, if we don't have enough experience with the thing we're working on to do that, we simply look at what our realistic expectation is and then add a small step on top of that, something that feels like it should be doable. So if Lisa has never shared an uncomfortable truth before, she might, for example, set her ambition to share one that she's been holding on to with a close friend that she trusts won't get too upset by it. Lisa can even plan out how to do that in a way and at a time and a place that feels somewhat comfortable or safe for her. And when Lisa succeeds in this, whether at her very first try or later on, she's likely to both feel good about living more in integrity and feel a sense of accomplishment for realizing her ambition. And when she's done similar things a few times so that she's able to update her realistic expectations of herself, she can push her ambition further. Again, it's very important to remember that our personal growth, self-esteem included, is not about taking the biggest steps possible to get to where we want to be as fast as we can. Even the smallest steps will get you there, as long as they go in the right direction and you keep taking them. And they are much more likely to not wear you out in the process. So as an exercise for these last two videos, I want you to think about whether there's an area in your life where you relatively often feel disappointed or frustrated with yourself. Don't focus too much on skills or things related to external validation, but somewhere that you don't live up to the person you are deep down. Whether that's related to your morals or desires or parts of your personality that you're hiding or whatever else. If there is, and there doesn't have to be, so don't make it up if you can't think of anything after spending some time with this. But if there is one or more, think about what your relevant expectations of yourself are. What are they based on? Are they based on what you want them to be, or what you think other people might want them to be? If you're continuously disappointed or frustrated with yourself because of this thing, odds are that your expectations are not realistic. So adjust your expectations based on what you typically do. Accept that that is your starting point, and that is perfectly fine. And once you have, think about what a realistic ambition to set for yourself is. Then go out and experience that thing with adjusted expectations and ambitions. From there, all you have to do is reach your realistic expectations and do your best to fulfill your realistic ambitions. Do this right, and it won't take long before you start to notice a significant difference in how you feel about yourself. One of the things I keep repeating to many of my coaching clients is you're not allowed to excuse success. And it's something that I tend to have to repeat over and over again with the vast majority of them. They might have had a job interview that went great, or made a huge sale at work, or had a great date, or whatever it is. And when I ask them about it, they start to explain why it wasn't their fault. How they got lucky, how it was the other person that did the heavy lifting, or whatever else. And that is a surefire way to tell your unconscious not to appreciate the things you do well. And since we know that self-esteem includes how much we appreciate ourselves, I'm guessing it's fairly obvious why this is a really bad idea, right? Don't get me wrong, sometimes you might experience a bit of luck, or run into someone who makes things easy for you. But whatever it is that happens, still happens to you, and not the person next to you or ahead of you or whatever. So there was something about you, whether something you did or the nature of who you are, that made this happen to you. So even when things seem to be random chance and not by your design or because of your effort, you should acknowledge the fact that you were a part of that situation, and at the very least, you can take pride in that. And when you actually made a choice or an effort to make something happen, and it did, even if you felt like you did everything wrong or had no idea what you were doing, well, then that's even more reason to take ownership of it and be proud, because whatever you did, no matter how it felt to you in that moment, was the right thing to do. Now, when I tell people to be proud of themselves and the things that they are and do, some get a little uncomfortable. Many people confuse the concept of being proud of themselves with being arrogant, self-involved, selfish, or similar. But pride and arrogance and all those other things are very different things. Healthy pride comes from a place of appreciating, celebrating, or enjoying something that we value in ourselves. And while it's great to share that with others, we don't have to share it in order to be able to enjoy that feeling. Though we should certainly feel free to share it with the people we care about so that they can be proud of us too if they'd like. Arrogance, self-centeredness, and all those other things, they come from a place of wanting to look good to others. And it often becomes very frustrating and even feel meaningless unless we get to share it with someone who gives us validation for it. These things are all about trying to make others feel good about us, while healthy pride is simply us feeling good about us. So be proud when you live up to your own realistic expectations. Be even prouder when you surpass them and achieve your ambitions or even more. Enjoy the feeling of feeling good about yourself because of who you are, because of your values or your morals or your actions. And never again blame your success, your positive experiences, your loving feelings for yourself or any of these other things on something external. Own them, celebrate them, and show yourself that you appreciate yourself for them. It will not just feel great in the moment. It will also reprogram your reticular activating system, ROS, that we talked about earlier, to look for opportunities to feel like that more often and break you free from any social programming from your past that might have taught you not to celebrate the things you appreciate about yourself. So do a little exercise right now and ask yourself this question. What about myself am I proud of? Own and celebrate the answers you come up with. And if you feel like you don't have any answers, well, that's just your social programming trying to prevent you from doing something that's uncomfortable for your unconscious that's focused on low self-esteem. Don't listen to that lie. Keep reflecting on the question until you find something, no matter how big or small, and then be proud of that thing. Because the moment you start experiencing a healthy pride in yourself, even for something tiny, the doors will start to open and you'll start to find more and more things to appreciate about yourself. Okay, so you might not like me as much after I say this next part, but stick with me anyways and it'll be worth it. Life isn't fair. It's as simple as that. Even the belief systems centered around a universal balance, such as karma, acknowledge that at the very least, life isn't always experienced as fair in the moment. Also, you're going to fail a lot in almost everything you do. Sometimes it'll be your fault. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll matter. Sometimes it'll be forgotten in seconds. And you probably won't reach all of your goals either. Some you won't reach because you haven't worked hard enough on them. Others because they were unrealistic to begin with. Am I saying this to try to offend you or make you feel demotivated or sad? Of course not. That would be a terrible idea for a course like this. I'm saying these things because it's the truth for all of us. But is that bad? Absolutely not. No, life isn't fair, but sometimes that'll work to your advantage. Yes, you're going to fail, but real failure only happens when we stop learning from it and give up. Anything other than that is just a building block towards success. And there are some of our goals that we shouldn't achieve, and even the ones that would have been great, but that we fail at, will open up room in our life for other things that might be just as good, if not better. And here's the most important part. None of these things, both the good and bad, should matter at all to how we feel about ourselves as a person. Because as we've discussed several times by now, our self-esteem isn't about what we can do, what we have, or what we get. Self-esteem is about how we value and appreciate the person that we are. And we aren't our luck, our successes, our goals, or our achievements. But for many people around the world, it sure seems like they are, at least at times. People all over the world connect their identity to their job, their income, their car, their skills, their partners, their social circles, and so on. Those with high self-esteem, however, realize that life isn't fair and that's okay. That failure is a natural part of everything we do, and without it, we simply can't really learn or grow. That while setting and working toward goals can be a great thing to do, whether we reach those goals or not doesn't reflect anything on our value as a human being. Those with high self-esteem feel just as good about themselves when they fail or have to let go of a goal as they would have if they had succeeded. At least as long as they have lived up to their realistic expectations of how hard they would try and how much in integrity they would be. And if they didn't live up to those realistic expectations, They use that as a learning lesson and a motivator for the next attempt, and then they get to feel good about themselves for learning and growing. As your self-esteem becomes fully genuine and healthy, this will become one of the side effects that you'll experience. But you don't have to wait until then for this to become how you experience the world. So here's an exercise that will help you achieve this healthy self-esteem mindset. Reflect on things from your past, whether that was yesterday or years ago, that you have failed at and that still negatively affect you. And think about what you learned from it. You might not have been aware of what you learned from it when it happened, but I bet that if you think about it now, you can find some lessons in there. They might be things you learn about yourself, or maybe you learn how to not do a particular thing, or maybe you even learn something about someone else. Appreciate that learning and think about how it might help you today and in the future. Where in your life are those learning lessons relevant now, or how can you use them tomorrow, next year, or in 10 years? And do this regularly, as often as you can, until it becomes a habit. Until the default thing you do after something doesn't work out the way you wanted it to is to reflect on what you learned from it and how that learning will help you improve your future. When this is the default way you think, and you no longer use failure, lost goals, unfair experiences, and so on to determine your self-esteem, you will have learned how to let go. It will become easier and easier to let go of all the things in your life that didn't turn out the way that you'd hoped, as well as the bad things in your past that have happened to you. The destructive power they once held over you will start to fade away, and you'll extract any learning lesson you can from them and leave the emotional baggage behind. So please, don't underestimate this exercise. Okay, now it's time to do one of my favorite exercises. And this is a big one, not just because we're going to dedicate a bit of time to it, but also because of how effective it is at building healthy self-esteem from within. So I can't insist enough that you play along as we go. Turn off your TV, stop texting your friend or whichever other distraction you might have going on, and give me your undivided attention for a few minutes. This exercise starts with a question that requires you to use your imagination, and I want you to imagine this as fully as you can. Imagine that you meet a perfectly identical copy of yourself. Someone with the exact same experiences, with the exact same people at the exact same times, with the same morals and beliefs, the same interests and habits, the same life and friends and looks and clothes and eating habits, even the same exact thoughts as you do. You imagining it? Okay, good. Now, I want you to ask yourself these 3 questions. 1. How much would you like that person? 2. What would you like about that person if the two of you were to spend time together? And 3. Is there anything you wouldn't like about them? And if so, what is it? And feel free to pause this video right now while you answer these questions. Take your time with them. It's also usually a good idea to write your answers down so that they'll be easy to use in the next part of the exercise, because there's a lot more to this. All right, you done that? You answered those questions, ready to move on? As you might have deducted, what you've just done is explore how much you like yourself, as well as map out what it is that you do like and don't like about yourself. Now, if your answers to these questions were that you would absolutely love that person and the two of you would be the best friends possible and there would be nothing you didn't like, that's amazing, and your self-esteem sounds like it's doing pretty well already. If you had those answers and still feel like it isn't, feel free to reach out. But if you're like the vast majority of people, your answers probably range from somewhat positive to downright negative. And here's the quick rundown of what each of these questions represent. Question 1, to a large extent, represent your big picture self-esteem. That is, how much you like yourself. Question 2 represents all the things that you should appreciate about yourself and take pride in. These are the things about you that you like and that you should keep reminding yourself of, especially when you start being hard on yourself. And question 3 is one we're going to explore a little more deeply. So next, I want you to look at your answers to question 3, what you wouldn't like about that perfect copy of yourself that you're spending time with, and I want you to check to see which of the things on that list, if any, are about external success and validation, and put a little check mark next to them. This would include things like money, popularity, even skills and results, like how good you are at sports, or how funny or interesting your social media posts are, and so on. Now again, I'll ask you, would you decide how much you value and appreciate your friends, family, or other loved ones based on things like that? No? Then why are you using them to decide how much you value or appreciate yourself? Remember that once you let go of any belief that tells you that these external things say anything about your value as a person, they'll stop affecting your self-esteem, and your self-esteem will start coming from where it's supposed to come from. So the more you internalize the things you learn in this course, the less likely these are to bother you, and eventually they'll disappear. So take those answers off your list. Anything that has to do with external validation or stuff like that, just remove them. Realize that they do not matter. Okay, now, if you have any answers left on question 3, I want you to divide them into 2 lists. One list we'll call your acceptance list. This is where all the things that you don't have the power to change should go. So here, our friend Lisa from earlier might have put how she wouldn't have liked the fact that her identical copy is too short to reach the top shelf at the supermarket, or that she's an introvert who regularly needs to take time to herself to recharge her battery instead of socializing, or other such things that she can't realistically change. The next is your change list, and this is for the things that you do have the power to change. As an example, Lisa might have written down that she wouldn't like that the identical copy of herself chooses not to interact with people at parties or whatever. That's behavior. That's not introversion. That's just behavior. And it's a behavior that can be changed. So it can go on the change list. So please, go ahead and sort your answers into those 2 lists before you move on with the course. Before we talk about how to accept things, I have to clear something up. It seems that a lot of people are under the impression that accepting something means they also have to feel good about it. But that doesn't have to be true. We can accept something without approving of it. We can even strongly dislike or disapprove of it, but still accept that it is reality and that it will continue to be what it is. To refuse to accept something that we're powerless to change in any meaningful and realistic way is to make ourselves a helpless and permanent victim of it. It gives that thing power over us, over how we feel, think, and act. But the moment we accept something for what it is, it starts to lose that power over us. That doesn't mean it stops existing or that it stops influencing our life. It might very well continue to do both. But when we recognize that we can't change or control it and stop putting our energy into trying to, wanting to, or wishing we could, we free up time and energy to put into things that will actually help us. So to explore how we can do this, how we can learn to accept the things that we can't change, I'm going to pass on to you some lessons that I've learned from 3 extraordinary people who each learned to accept things that might very well have broken many other people. The first lesson is to let go of hope. And I know that sounds dramatic, but all it means is to make sure we stop hoping against hope that these things will change when we know that they realistically won't. I learned this lesson from a friend of mine who, after living a very active life as an athlete, broke his back and became paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors gave him basically 0 chance of ever walking again. For a while after his accident, he struggled with more than just the injury. He had lost his spark, his excitement for life. And then, very suddenly, or at least that's how it seemed to me, he was back to his old self, even though he was still fully dependent on the wheelchair. When we talked about his experience, he told me that it wasn't until he gave up hope that there would be some sort of miracle or sudden technological breakthrough or something that would get him back on his feet that he was able to accept his new situation. While we talked, he smiled, and he told me that he was, of course, open for that to happen, and if it did, he would be ecstatic and first in line for it. But when he accepted the fact that he was going to spend the rest of his life in the wheelchair. His thinking started to shift from hoping against hope to get away from the wheelchair to focusing on the life that he could build with the wheelchair. And that leads us to the second lesson that I was taught, learning to work with it. If what you need to accept is something that is an actual obstacle in your life, something that fundamentally prevents you from doing or being what you'd ideally like to do or be, your energy will be better spent on creating new goals that are achievable for you than to keep trying to fight a fight that you can't win. This lesson came from a conversation I had with a woman who had become blind from an illness she had. Before that happened, she had made her living as a very successful photographer who traveled across the globe to do photo shoots. But this was now a profession that she no longer could do, at least not in the way that she had been passionate about. She grieved over the loss of her sight and her passion and work for quite a while, but eventually she started to explore the options she did have rather than to focus on the ones that had gone away. And that's when she came up with an idea. She was going to teach photography. She fully embraced her situation and even used it to her advantage. The concept of a blind person teaching seeing people how to take beautiful photos turned out to be an amazing marketing tool. And she has since gone on to not just travel as much as always to do talks and courses, but make more money than she did, meet more people, and according to herself, feel like she was finally making a difference for other people and not just herself. And the third lesson is to find meaning in the things you must accept. To explore how the thing that you see as an obstacle or a problem can actually add meaning or value to something, even if it's limiting that thing in other ways. This I learned from a colleague of mine who had been in a fire when he was in his early 20s, I believe, and experienced third-degree burns over the vast majority of his body. His health had recovered, but to put it in the words that he used to describe himself, his once handsome looks were now hidden under a layer of silly putty. While the two of us were talking backstage at a conference that we were both speaking at, he told me that after the fire, he was sure that he would live his life in loneliness, because surely no one would be attracted to someone who looked like him. But eventually, he started to not just realize that looks weren't as important as he had thought they were when he had them, but also that now that he was less focused on looking good to others, he was able to be fully present and enjoy conversations and connections in a new and much more meaningful way. He realized that anyone giving him their time and attention were doing so out of a genuine interest in him as a person and nothing else. And according to him, the best relationships he'd ever had, both platonic, friendship, and romantic, had all been after the fire. His burned exterior was no longer something he hated and wished away. It was something that had helped him live a more satisfying and meaningful life. So, your exercise is to apply any or all of these lessons to the things on your acceptance list. To stop clinging on to any impossible hopes and instead focus on the things that will be helpful to you. To figure out how you can work with your challenges and use them to your advantage, or to find meaning in them that makes them valuable to you. Or, of course, if the things on your list aren't nearly that big, dramatic, or actually in your way, to simply use what you learned in the chapter about letting go to let go of. I've never really been a fan of the concept of finding yourself. To me, it makes a lot more sense to create myself, to consciously choose who and how I want to be, to put my energy into deciding for myself who I am, rather than to hope that someone or something else will come along and tell me. It just seems a lot more reliable, and it makes me the master of my own life. And creating yourself is exactly what you're doing when you commit to changing the habits, actions, values, or opinions, or whatever else you have that you find unacceptable about yourself. And that would be the things that you have on your change list. And the good news is that while some changes might require both time, focus, and energy, it's rarely very hard to figure out just how to make those changes. In fact, most of the time, this kind of personal growth can be done in 3 steps. The first step is what you've already done by creating your change list. which is to identify the changes that you want to make. To do this, it will also often help to both know what we're getting rid of and what we're replacing it with. Because it can be a lot more effective to replace something negative with something positive than to simply remove something negative without letting something else take its place. So someone who wants to be less judgmental will usually have an easier time if they focus on what they want to be instead. So instead of just saying, I want to be less judgmental, they might choose to say that they want to be more accepting or open-minded. Step 2 is to learn about what you want to create. Odds are that if we're creating something new in ourselves, we'll have far less experience with and knowledge about this new thing than the old thing. And this is true even if the new thing seems obvious and easy to understand. Most people would, for example, say that understanding how to be more accepting is simple enough. That it's just about letting people be who they are and not judging and condemning them for it. And while that is true enough, most of these people might not be aware that curiosity is one of the best ways to become more accepting and open-minded. Or that better and more confident personal boundary setting is likely to make them a lot more comfortable being around people who live a different kind of lifestyle than they do. So when you commit to making a change, learn more about the things that you want to change into. The more tools and knowledge you have, the better you understand it, the simpler the process will be. And finally, the last step is to put in effort over time. Very few changes are made instantly. In most cases, we'll have to keep working on things over time. We'll have setbacks, we'll feel demotivated, and sometimes we'll just plain forget to put in the effort to practice. If we let these experiences frustrate, scare, or disappoint us, we're likely to give up before the change actually takes place. So we have to be both patient and committed. If this change is important to us, the crucial thing isn't how soon we can make it permanent, but that it becomes permanent. So don't be afraid to go at your own pace. Challenge yourself, but don't wear yourself out. When you do correct expectation management and create realistic ambitions, it won't be a matter of if you succeed, only when. Your exercise is probably fairly obvious. If you already made your change list, you've already done step 1. If not, do that now. Then commit some time in the next couple of days to learn more about the things you want to change into. Your goal for this step is to feel confident that you know how you can create those changes and have ideas for strategies that are likely to work. And by the way, if you have any trouble at all with this step, don't be afraid to reach out to me or to ask for support or advice in my Facebook group. I'm here to help, and so are all the other members in there. Once you have the knowledge and strategies in place, go to step 3 and start putting in the effort. Start doing the work. It's usually a good idea to focus on 1 or 2 things at a time so you don't overwhelm yourself. Just remember your expectation and ambition management and be patient but focused. If you do, it won't be long until you start seeing a real change. And when you've accepted the things on your acceptance list and are making real changes to anything left on your change list, you're becoming the kind of person that you simply have to value and appreciate highly. And that is genuine, healthy self-esteem. Through my work, I've met a lot of people who claim they wanted change, but who didn't really want to change anything about how they did things, what they spent their time and energy on, how they lived, and so on. Unfortunately, that's not very realistic. The truth is that if we want to change anything, including our self-esteem, we have to be prepared to both make and experience other changes in our lives too. Now, most people would expect that building a strong and healthy self-esteem would only lead to positive changes. And I agree with them, but only if we're open to the fact that some of those changes might not look positive at first. A recent client of mine, for example, was heartbroken to discover that there were people in her life who no longer wanted her company after she improved her self-esteem. Losing those people seemed like a significant negative experience at first because they were a big part of her social life. And she even started to question whether the changes she had made in herself were good. But Once a little time had passed, it became obvious to her that all of the people that had left because she no longer accepted it when they took advantage of her friendliness. She hadn't truly been a friend that they loved and respected for who she was as a person, just someone they could use to get more of what they wanted. And after they were no longer a part of her life, she soon found new friends who wanted to be in her life for all the right reasons. Another client of mine found that his newfound self-esteem suddenly made it practically impossible for him to keep the job he had as a telemarketer, since it often forced him to step outside of his integrity to make sales. The thought of quitting and not having the income he had come to rely on was not just scary, but created lots of ripple effects in his lifestyle too. And for a while after quitting his job, he did have a couple of challenges that he hadn't had before. But it didn't take too long before he found another job and built a new lifestyle that fit his new self much better. Now, these are dramatic examples, of course, and for most people, things of this magnitude won't be an issue at all. For most, the changes involved are about creating new habits, spending some of their time and energy on new things, and to do certain things in new ways. But there will be changes, whether big or small, important or not, and we have to be willing to accept and adapt to those changes, and remember that change opens up opportunities to create something new, something that might just fit us a lot better. Sometimes that might take time, and sometimes the opportunities and positive aspects of the changes won't be obvious at first. But all we have to do is remember that any change that comes as a result of us being more of our true self is a change that will open up space and opportunity for us to live the life that we truly want. And for the record, you are much more likely to experience instantly positive changes in your life when you value and appreciate yourself more. One of the concerns I often find among my clients is that they worry about whether they deserve the life and the things that they want. And when they ask me about that, I usually do that annoying thing where I answer their question with another question. So if you ever have thoughts like that, if you ever worry about whether you deserve the life or the things that you want, ask yourself this question. Who decides what you deserve? Is it me? Is it your parents? Is it a stranger on the street? Is it the people on your TV? Or is it you? When it comes to your life, you are the only one who can decide what you deserve. There are no universal rules or requirements or standards that we have to live up to in order to deserve the things that we want. It all comes down to what we believe. And when our self-esteem is healthy enough that we truly see that we are valuable and a worthwhile person, it becomes a lot easier to decide that we deserve good things. But we should take this even a step further. Because if there are no universal or external measurements of what we deserve, then the only thing left to consider is whether we're able to create the things we want. And if there's a way to decide what we deserve, that is it. After all, that's how we gauge whether we can do or have everything else in life. All those things that we haven't mistakenly believed there's some sort of external standard for deserving. We don't spend any time considering if we deserve to go to the bathroom or to drink water when we're thirsty. At least, I hope you don't. When we have a need or a want that it is up to us to satisfy, we do what we need to do to satisfy it. And when we're able to do what's necessary to get what we want, we happily have it. Now, obviously, there's a big difference between having a glass of water and living the life of your dreams. But that difference isn't in your worthiness or what you deserve. That difference is only in one place: the effort it will take to make it happen. If you are willing to make the necessary effort, and you make that effort in integrity and based only on your wants, needs, or desires, then you deserve that thing just as much as you deserve to use the bathroom when your bladder is full. It really is that simple. And any thoughts or people telling you differently are either suffering from bad social programming or trying to control you. Either way, blissfully ignoring them will be great for you. So if this is something that you need to work on, your exercise is simple. Keep reminding yourself that you deserve anything you're willing to put in the needed effort to make happen. Because if you create it, it is yours. And if you create it, you've put in the needed effort to deserve it. A fairly common trap for people to fall into when they start building healthier self-esteem is to confuse temporary emotions and thoughts with our baseline ones. Temporary emotions can be described as emotions that are out of the ordinary. An obvious example can be things like experiencing grief after losing a loved one. Even though it might not feel like it in the moment, we do know deep down that the majority of the grief will pass and not be how we feel every day for the rest of our lives. So we don't take it on as a permanent thing. Less obvious examples are those emotions and thoughts we have about everyday experiences that don't feel that much out of the ordinary, but still might be. This can include feeling a little more stressed than usual and having a hard time seeing why, or being a little extra frustrated or sad for no obvious reason, and even feeling bad about ourselves because of something that isn't actually related to our self-esteem, but just seems like it is in the moment. And our baseline emotions are how we generally feel when we don't have any of that unusual thinking getting in the way. When we're not over-focused on anything temporary in our lives and creating temporary emotions for ourselves based on that. You can think of baseline emotions like the shape of a tree when there's no wind, and temporary emotions as the shape it has when it's windy. The wind might bend and sway the tree and its branches in various directions, but once it stops, the tree goes back to how it usually looks. So when people confuse their temporary emotions with baseline ones, they can get into trouble. This often happens after their self-esteem has started to become more healthy. They're starting to love themselves more, to feel better whenever they think of themselves, and to treat themselves better. But then, unexpectedly, something comes along that they start having negative thoughts about. And when they start feeling worse, they believe that they must have returned to their old, unhealthy self-esteem just because they don't feel as good about themselves today as they did yesterday or last week. And if they start to believe that and stop putting in the effort that was helping their self-esteem, they might hold on to this new negative way of thinking for longer than necessary and actually start pushing their self-esteem backwards. And if they don't catch themselves in time, they might very well end up where they used to be. This can happen to everyone, and in all honesty, it does happen to plenty of people. But there are two pieces of good news. Firstly, it's not all that hard to prevent this from happening. And secondly, it will be even easier to rebuild our self-esteem the second time than it was the first if we do happen to fall into this trap. To prevent this from happening in the first place, we have to keep reminding ourselves when we feel like we're experiencing a setback that it's just temporary. That once the temporary emotions and thoughts go away, and they will go away unless we hold on to them and tell ourselves that they won't, we will return to the baseline we had created before they showed up. In some cases, this can be easier said than done, especially if the temporary emotions take a long time to clear out. But you have absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain by sticking to the belief that they will pass. Today, tomorrow, next week, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that they will. And they'll usually pass even faster if you keep putting in the effort to improve your self-esteem that you were making before they appeared. And even if you fall for this trap and end up setting your self-esteem back while you're in the midst of these temporary emotions, don't panic. The moment you realize that you did fall into the trap, get back to the work you were doing before. When you do, your mind will start to remember the lessons it learned and the progress it made the last time. You might have to repeat some of the things you've done before, but you'll almost always notice that the progress happens faster the second time around. Because after all, you've already proven to your mind that it can improve your self-esteem and even taught it how to do it. So this time around, you won't have to spend as much time and effort to convince it that it can be done and show it how. I often say that you will act like the person you believe you are. In the context of self-esteem, That means that people tend to behave in ways that match the level of self-esteem that they tell themselves that they have. People with healthy self-esteem will usually, for example, have a habit of taking pride in themselves and the things they do. They live in integrity, they don't fear failure, and so on. And these are, of course, things that we've already talked about, fundamental mindsets that go along with healthy self-esteem. But in addition to these mindsets, there are several other behaviors that tend to be typical for people with healthy self-esteem. Things like how to handle criticism, whether it comes from ourselves or other people, willingness to try new things, teaching others how to treat us, and lots more. And those are the kind of things that we'll be talking about in this section of the course. But it's important to remember that this isn't about creating new external results such as social status, money, or similar. The point of these behaviors is that they show our unconscious mind that we value ourselves highly enough to take care of ourselves by doing the things that are good for us. And I'm going to talk a little more about that in a little bit. For most people with healthy self-esteem, doing these things make perfect sense. But for those with unhealthy self-esteem, the following behaviors might sometimes feel unnatural, strange, even maybe selfish, uncomfortable, or scary at first. But here's the thing. While those with unhealthy self-esteem will naturally start to display these behaviors when their self-esteem improves, they can also help their self-esteem by practicing these behaviors before they feel natural. When you create the habit of behaving in ways that will support and serve you as the person you are, your unconscious mind will start to realize that you are valuable enough to take care of. And that means that it will start to value, appreciate, and care for you more, which of course means a healthier self-esteem. For maximum effect, please combine what you're about to learn with the things that you've already learned. Simply copying these following behaviors and ignoring everything else from the course is not likely to give you optimal results. And also, please remember to do correct expectation management when you start to practice behaviors that aren't yet natural for you. Don't expect that you'll get it perfectly right straight away. Be patient and set realistic expectations and ambitions. As you surely know by now, how we feel about ourselves only comes from our own thoughts, even when it seems like it's coming from outside of ourselves. It might, for example, seem like the way someone treated us badly when we were younger is what makes us like ourselves less today. But in reality, it's the thoughts we have about the way they treated us when we were younger that do. And when I say that, I don't mean to belittle your past experiences, and I certainly don't mean to make you feel bad about making yourself feel bad. Instead, I'm trying to shine a light on what I hope is a very uplifting fact, that the only thing that needs to change in order for your feelings to change is your thoughts. And that, of course, is what we've been trying to do throughout this whole course. But as you might remember, your thoughts aren't just the thoughts that you are aware of, your conscious thoughts. You also have tons of thinking going on in your unconscious that you have no direct control over. You can, however, influence your unconscious thinking over time. And a very good way to do that is to make conscious choices that shows your unconscious what it should be focusing on and thinking about. And while there are thousands of such choices we can make, maybe even more, there's one guiding principle that will keep you on track to healthy self-esteem no matter what the choice is about. And that is to always show yourself that you're worth it. Showing yourself that you're worth it means to make the kind of decisions for yourself that you would make for someone you love more than anything or anyone else. It means to treat yourself well, to make the choices that will benefit you mentally, physically, socially, and so on. To prioritize yourself, to set boundaries, to practice self-care, and whatever else makes sense to you. In short, to show yourself love and respect and take the best care of yourself that you can. When you do, you won't just benefit from all these healthy decisions, but you'll also show all of the processes in your unconscious mind that you are someone that you value highly. Because if you didn't, you wouldn't be making these kinds of loving decisions for yourself. Does that make sense? The only thing we have to keep in mind when we do this is that treating ourselves this way doesn't always mean we should just give in to every temptation, to eat ice cream for dinner every day just because it's yummy, to watch TV instead of exercising because it's easier, to not go to work today because we're tired, and so on. Demonstrating to ourselves that we're worth it also includes building the life that we want for ourselves. It often means to be disciplined in the moment so that we can have more of what we want in the future. And here's a simple way to find the right balance for this. Think of yourself as someone you've been hired to take care of. Your job is to give this person support, encouragement, appreciation, but also help this person build the kind of life that's perfect for them. If you do the job well, your payment will be all the things that you dream of being and having. And if you do the job poorly, you'll still have to keep doing the job, and your payment will be a bunch of the things you don't want. When we demonstrate the kind of love for ourselves that seeks to do what we know are the right things to do for us, our self-esteem will grow. Our unconscious starts looking for proof that we're worth the love and effort we're making. It starts making us aware of opportunities to treat ourselves well. And its thinking, even about our past, tends to start changing for the better. So how do we do this in practice? Well, here's a simple exercise to get you started. Take some time to think about what choices you make regularly that do not prioritize yourself. Choices that you make either because they're easier than what you know you should do, or where you prioritize others of yourself just because you think anything else would be selfish, or even habits you have that you know aren't serving you and your life in the big picture. Choose one or two of the things you come up with to start out, and decide what a more self-loving choice would be. Then, break your old pattern and make that choice or do those things. And keep doing them until they become habits and feel natural. It might be uncomfortable at first, especially if it involves other people, but that's just your old thinking trying to get you to do the things in the same ways that you've always done them. Don't listen to that, because doing the things the way you've always done them will only get you the results you've always gotten. So step outside of your comfort zone and do one or two things a day that don't seem too scary or uncomfortable. Once you start feeling comfortable with those, pick one or two more. Then keep going until you have replaced all of your low self-esteem habits and choices with new ones that show your unconscious that you're worth it, that you value yourself highly. And if you need any help with breaking free from the habits of people-pleasing, becoming more comfortable saying no, and similar things, go check out my assertiveness course where I talk about that in more detail. Earlier in the course, we talked about letting go and how to start to appreciate and learn from our mistakes rather than punish ourselves for them. The knowledge and exercises in that video will help you stop criticizing yourself. But what about when other people criticize you? Imagine that you've made yourself your favorite meal. You take a bite, and while it might not be the best meal you've ever made, it's just how you like it. And then suddenly a stranger walks over, takes a bite of it, and tells you that it tastes all wrong and that you have to put some dead bugs in it or there's something wrong with you. How seriously do you think you should take that stranger? Would you decide that since the stranger didn't like it, there was definitely something wrong with the meal and what you had done? Would you immediately feel bad about yourself and your cooking skills if you didn't do what he said and put dead bugs in your food? I truly hope not. In addition to self-criticism, we also sometimes have to deal with criticism from others. Sometimes, though admittedly not often, that criticism is just as ridiculous as the example I gave. And most people are pretty good at ignoring criticism like that and not really let it affect them. But in many cases, and for many people, it can be very hard to see that it is completely pointless to take almost all criticism we get from others more seriously than that example. Let me explain why with another look into my personal life. My wife is a brilliant woman. She's incredibly capable, insightful, and knows a lot of things about a lot of things. However, if she was to walk into my office and criticize the way I set up my fish tank, I wouldn't feel particularly bad about that. Don't get me wrong, since I trust her judgment and intelligence, I'd listen to what she said, consider whether or not she made any good points, and if I thought she did, learn from them and do better next time, And just like we discussed in the chapter about letting go, that would make me feel pretty good. But if I decided that my wife was probably wrong about what she was saying, I would thank her for sharing her thoughts and then forget about the whole thing. And her criticism wouldn't give me any reason to feel bad about myself, my skills, my fish tank, or anything else. Because while my wife is all of those things that I described, I have a lot more experience and knowledge than her with fish tanks. I've had several throughout my life, and I'm pretty knowledgeable about all the various aspects of keeping fish. And letting someone whose experience, knowledge, or skill is much lesser than our own tell us what we should do or how we should do things when we disagree with what they're saying is just crazy. That's like letting a 12-year-old tell a professional race car driver how he should drive his car. And the same goes when someone gives us negative feedback on things that are not related to skills or knowledge, such as our values, morals, behaviors, even the way that we dress or the entertainment we enjoy, and so on. If someone's beliefs, values, or tastes do not match our own, we must not listen to what they say unless we decide, based on our own beliefs, values, and tastes, that they have a point. In other words, there are 3 things that must be in place anytime we take other people's negative feedback seriously. 1, we must respect their knowledge, experience, insight, skill, taste, or whatever else is relevant to that particular topic. 2, we must be confident that any values, beliefs, or tastes they have that are relevant match our own. And 3, we must, based on our own reasoning, understanding, experience, and logic, agree with what they said, or at least want to explore it to learn more. If all 3 of these qualifiers aren't present, we have to be very careful about taking their feedback seriously, which also means that when the feedback comes from someone we don't know well enough, we have to either ignore it or find out if the person giving it to us is someone worth listening to. And when they are, and we decide that the feedback they gave us is likely to be helpful, we have to remember the exercise from that previous video about letting go and be curious about what we can learn from this and excited about how it can help us improve. And a simple place to start doing this can be to ask yourself the question, how will this make things better? When it becomes a habit to focus on what we can learn and how this can help us improve, instead of judging and criticizing ourselves, we'll stop experiencing negative feedback from others as destructive criticism that can make us feel bad about ourselves or what we've done, and instead start seeing it as constructive criticism that we welcome and treasure because it will help us grow. Another thing that tends to happen for people with healthy self-esteem is that they stop paying attention to the idea that some people are more or less valuable than others based on their personality, experiences, success, status, or similar. Or to put it in a different way, they stop paying attention to who is high value and who is not, who is cool and who is not, and so on. People with healthy self-esteem don't need to feel good about themselves at the expense of others. And they don't feel bad about themselves based on other people either. And when that happens, they no longer need to feel threatened by people who fit the glorified, media-enhanced perceptions of high value, and they start seeing the value that all people have. Of course, that doesn't mean that people with healthy self-esteem always love and get along with everybody. It is perfectly normal for someone with healthy self-esteem to dislike someone, to pay more attention to some people than others, and so on. But this dislike doesn't come from social programming or other external sources. It simply comes from recognizing that they're just not compatible with each other, and it's usually accompanied by the knowledge that this doesn't make any of them more or less valuable than the other. It simply means that they're incompatible enough that they're not likely to get along very well. Because here's the thing. We're surrounded by entertainment, media, social media, cultural pressure, faulty learning, and tons of other things that keep telling us which kinds of people we should look up to, admire, respect, like, and love, and which kinds of people we shouldn't. But the truth is that a lot of the things that are portrayed in all of these places won't always match what's actually valuable to us. Our personal tastes, interests, desires, and personal values differ. What's right for me and a friend or a partner might very well be completely wrong for you. That doesn't mean that one of us has better taste than the other. It simply means we like different things. And once we start to truly see that someone else's value can't be judged by the standard pushed upon us by the world around us, and instead only by what we think of that person as a human being, we'll start having a far easier time finding the people who are right for us as well. A lot of people believe that the only way they can find the right people for themselves is to be good enough. And unfortunately, many of them believe that to be good enough, they have to live up to some sort of external standard of success, beauty, popularity, skill, or whatever. And those who believe that tend to do their best to live up to those standards, often going so far as to misrepresent themselves, to highlight or even lie about what they believe society would celebrate about them and hide away the things they believe would be looked down on. But if you think about it, that doesn't make any sense. After all, the people we want in our lives, the people who would be truly right for us, will be the people who share enough of our values, morals, interests, and so on, that being with them would allow both of us to be ourselves fully. Because don't we all want to be with people who accept us for who we truly are, and who we accept for who they truly are? How are we supposed to find the people who would love us for being us if we don't show the world who we are? Trying to live up to the made-up external standards that surround us will only make us hide our true self and make it a lot harder to truly connect with those who are right for us. So if we want to have any hope of being able to find those people, we have to show them who we truly are. We can't pay attention to what the world tells us we should be, look, or act like. We have to be, look, or act like ourselves. We have to display our values and morals in what we do and say. We have to show the world our interests, our dreams, our desires, so that the people who match with them, the people we're looking for and who are looking for us, can see that they found someone that they're compatible with. So the reason people with healthy self-esteem don't pay attention to what they've been told they should be like, look like, or whatever, is because they recognize that when they ignore those things, they will finally be free to genuinely, authentically, and unashamedly be themselves. And when they are, they will attract the people into their lives that truly belong there. So here's your exercise for this chapter. Start looking for the things that make the people around you uniquely them. Stop paying attention to their external success or looks or status or whatever else. And when you talk to people, actively search out the things you want to learn about them. The things that will show both of you how compatible you are. An easy way to practice this is to take some time in the morning to think about who you are likely to talk to that day. Then, choose a question or two for each of those people that you're going to ask. Something that you're genuinely interested in learning about that person, and that might give you a glimpse into how compatible the two of you are on the things you ask about. Do this every day, and soon you won't have to think about it anymore. It will just happen. It'll be how you speak to people. And you'll not just have better conversations, but likely also start to feel an increase in your own self-esteem when your mind recognizes that it's not just your value that is immune to the influences of external factors, but everyone's. When we recognize that it's not our external circumstances that makes us valuable as a person or not, the desire to prove ourselves also tends to fade. And by that, I mean that we stop feeling like we need to show off or in any way demonstrate our value to the people around us. Don't get me wrong, someone with a healthy self-esteem will still demonstrate their skills and knowledge as a potential employee when they go to job interviews, or by performing them for their friends or participating in classes or competitions and so on. But they do that because they enjoy doing it, and not because they feel they need to do it in order to gain approval or some sort of value. They simply won't be confusing those things with their personal worth, and they have very few concerns about how others see them. Not too long ago, I watched a friend of mine who has been an established actor in TV and movies for over 20 years talk to someone who had just landed their first TV commercial. My friend listened intently to their story, celebrated their success, told them how impressed he was, all with complete sincerity. Not once did he feel the need to highlight his own, much bigger successes. He had nothing to prove, so he could be there in the moment and connect fully with the other person. At another get-together, a couple I know was telling a story. Well, the wife was telling it. And the story made everyone laugh at the expense of the silly, short-sighted things her husband had done. Now, I happened to be around when what she was talking about actually happened, and I immediately recognized that the wife was exaggerating a lot while telling her story. That most of the things that people were laughing at her husband for never happened. I commented on this to him later, and he shrugged and said, it makes her happy to tell it that way and makes everyone happy to hear it. Doesn't really affect me one way or the other, so why would I correct her? Both of these are examples of people with healthy self-esteem not needing to prove themselves. And there are thousands of other examples like them. The point is simple. People with healthy self-esteem don't act out of insecurity, a need for approval, or a need to demonstrate high value. Because when they generate healthy self-esteem from within themselves, these things become a waste of time. That being said, keep in mind that it's perfectly fine to contribute to a conversation with your own experiences or correct something that's important to correct. But those with healthy self-esteem only do this when it adds to the situation, and never because they feel like they have to make themselves look better so that others might like them better. Does that make sense? Your exercise for this is simple. Reflect on the situations you're in the most often in your life and explore whether any of the things that you tend to do or say are done or said in the hopes that others might like you better, respect you more, look up to you, or similar, and not just because you enjoy saying or doing those things or think they're important. If you find any such things, think about what you would do or say if you already felt perfectly fine with yourself and if you didn't have any need for validation or approval from other people in order to feel good. Then, choose at least one of those things and start practicing the healthy self-esteem behavior. In most cases, it's best to start with something small and easy, something that won't be too scary. Once you start becoming comfortable with not proving yourself to gain external validation, you'll solidify the fact that your self-esteem comes from within. What was the last new thing that you tried? And when did you try it? How about before that? And before that? Trying new things, learning new things, experiencing new things. These have all been recommended by experts who work in fields such as mental health and aging for years. It turns out that when we stop learning new things, our brain starts to suffer and deteriorate. It has no reason to create new connections, and old connections no longer being used start to disappear. Some experts have even said that one of the best things we can do to prevent diseases like Alzheimer's is to be lifelong learners, to keep our brain evolving and changing throughout our life. And yet, the vast majority of adults tend to stick to the same things over and over again. For some, it's because they enjoy the routine. Others say that it's because of a lack of time and energy. But, curiously enough, we tend to see that the adults who often try new things also have daily routines, and that they're just as often pressed for time and energy as everyone else. So what is the difference between these two groups? Well, you probably guessed it. Those who regularly try, learn, and experience new things also tend to have a healthy self-esteem. And understanding why is fairly straightforward now that you know what you know. People with high self-esteem aren't afraid of failing because they know that it's not just natural, but one of the best ways to learn. They don't give up on new things because they don't have to criticize themselves if they don't immediately do it very well, so they're happy to plug away at it and just play around. And they don't have to listen to any criticism they might get from other people either. Combine that with not letting poor skills or bad experiences affect how good they feel about themselves as a person, and there are suddenly very few reasons left to not try something new. People with healthy self-esteem can fail with a smile and keep going for as long as something is fun and entertaining. And when trying new things is often fun and entertaining, it becomes a lot more interesting. And doing new things doesn't have to take up a lot of time or energy either, or even interfere with our routines all that much. Yes, it's great if we do something that shakes everything up now and then, but we can start as simply as replacing some of the things we regularly do with something new that will take up about the same amount of time and energy. For example, if your routine is to watch TV for an hour or two after dinner, you can stay on that couch and simply replace TV with a book or with drawing or writing or calling someone you love or whatever else you think you might enjoy. It'll take up just as much time as watching TV, require very little extra energy, and open up a world of new learning and experiences. This won't just help you maintain a healthier brain, but also let you connect with yourself in new ways. And that can do wonders for how you see and feel about yourself. So, I want to suggest this exercise for you. Make a list of things you might want to try. It doesn't matter if it would be the first time you ever tried it, or if it's just something that you haven't done in a while. It doesn't matter if it's big or small, easy or hard, or anything else. Just write a list, as long as you can get it, of anything that comes to mind that might be fun or interesting to you. Once you've finished that list, look at your schedule for the next week. Pick one or two of those things that you can either fit into an open time in your schedule, or that you can do instead of one of the things that you usually do. Then, commit to trying those new things at those times. Once you have, make this a habit. Try to put new experiences, both big and small, into your life regularly. The worst thing that happens is that you just get to try some new things that weren't that great. But the best and far more likely thing is that you'll start waking up more interests, passions, wants, and dreams that you can enjoy. And regularly doing things you enjoy shows your mind that you want to take care of you, which can do wonders for your self-esteem. When I start talking about optimism and pessimism, a lot of people expect me to say that people with healthy self-esteem are all optimists. But I'm not going to say that because that would be a lie. People with healthy self-esteem are just as divided among these two categories as everyone else. Granted, the pessimists among them tend to feel a little better about their lives in general, but there are lots of people with healthy self-esteem who just can't help but expect the worst in most cases. But there is one thing that sets optimists and pessimists with healthy self-esteem apart from those with low self-esteem. While a low self-esteem optimist might see the glass as half full, and a low self-esteem pessimist sees the glass as half empty, those with high self-esteem from either camp tend to focus more on the fact that they can refill the glass if they need to. In some ways, you can say that both optimists and pessimists with healthy self-esteem tend to be at least part realist. In other words, they're more likely to accept the situation as it is, whether they think the situation is probably going to work out well or not, and focus on what they want to do about it, rather than what they think the situation will do to or for them. The pessimist with healthy self-esteem might expect his job interview to go poorly, but he will still do everything he can to prepare well for it and do his best while giving the interview. The optimist might expect the job interview to be super easy, but she also will do everything she can to prepare for it and do the best she can while she's there. And we can adopt this mindset and practice this behavior while we work on improving our self-esteem. And when we do, we'll have the opportunity to show ourselves that we're working toward the things we deem to be right, good, and important. And that shows our unconscious that we're someone that is worth the effort it will take to refill the glass. And it will set several of those unconscious processes on the task of building more healthy self-esteem from the inside. And it's actually pretty easy to do this. So if you feel like you can benefit from becoming more of a realist, here's a simple exercise. Think about something coming up in your life that you either have optimistic or pessimistic expectations for, preferably something that's at least a little important to you. Now, don't dwell too much on how you think the thing will go. Instead, ask yourself this simple question. What can I do, learn, or prepare to get the most out of this situation? Once you find an answer to that question, go do, learn, or prepare accordingly. Make sure that when the thing happens, you're as prepared as you could realistically be, and while you're at it, please remember to do correct expectation management. Then, go face that situation with the intent of creating the best results you can with the knowledge and resources you have available. Odds are that you'll get a lot more out of it than if you'd spend more time expecting things to be easy or worrying about all the things that could go wrong. Once you've done this a couple of times, so that you have a feeling for how this works, start making it a habit. Start doing it every day. Whether you have a predictable situation coming up in the near future or something spontaneously happens that needs to be dealt with, simply ask yourself a question like, what can I do, learn, or prepare to get the most out of this situation? In this video, I'm going to talk about how people treat us the way we teach them to treat us, and how we can teach them to treat us the right way. But why am I talking about how other people treat us when I've said over and over and over again that healthy self-esteem comes from within ourselves and not from other people? Well, it's because this isn't about other people. This is about the fact that when we let other people treat us in ways we don't like, our unconscious has to figure out why. And the simplest and often most common explanation it comes up with is that if we allow others to treat us badly, that must mean that we value them over ourselves. And that thought is, of course, horrible for our self-esteem. And even worse than that, letting other people treat us in ways that aren't right for us can keep us from living in integrity too. Simple example of that might be if our friend Mike lets the people in his life interrupt him and ignore what he has to say all the time. If he does, he might find it very hard to follow his personal morals when he needs to speak up about unjust behavior. So we have to teach the people around us how we want to be treated. If they respect us, they will adapt to that. And if they don't, well, we really shouldn't let them have any significant role in our life, because allowing someone who doesn't respect us to have significant influence over our life is a surefire way to make things uncomfortable for ourselves. Now, the way we teach people how to treat us is through show and tell. To explain how we show and tell, let's make up a little story. Let's say that Nina has a new boyfriend, and he's invited her to a dinner party where she will get to meet all of his friends for the first time. When Nina shows up, her behavior is the first thing that will show people how to treat her. So if Nina is quiet, doesn't say much, tries her best to not call attention to herself, odds are that the group will treat her as a quiet, maybe even shy person. They might still be nice to her, of course, but if, for example, a group decision needs to be made, they're less likely to ask her opinion. People might also be less likely to engage her directly in conversation and other such things. If Nina, however, introduces herself to everyone, actively participates in conversations, and makes herself part of the group as best she can, she's more likely to be included in group decisions, engaged in personal conversations, and so on, because she seems more engaged, confident, present, whatever. And here's the thing. Neither of these behaviors are necessarily better than the other. If Nina doesn't want a lot of attention, if she doesn't want to be asked about group decisions and being a little quiet is natural for her and what she's comfortable with, then it's perfectly fine for her to be that. If, however, she's being quiet out of habit or insecurity, even though it will bother her if people don't engage with her, she should probably do what she can to display the kind of behavior that is more likely to get her the results she wants. She should try to show the group that she wants to be included through her actions. In many cases, our ability to show others how to treat us comes from our social confidence. And if you want to do some work on that, I recommend you go check out my confidence course. So that's show. Now let's talk about tell. Telling people how to treat us usually happens in two different situations. When we can anticipate the need to tell them, and when we have to adjust someone's behavior during or after it happens. Anticipating the need to tell someone how to treat us can, as an example, happen if we're about to be in a new situation with someone we know. We might be bringing a friend along to a business dinner, and if we need for our friend to treat us in any way that might be different from how they usually treat us, we should tell that friend about it beforehand. We should both explain what our needs are and why we have them. Adjusting someone's behavior is usually about speaking up after someone has treated us in a way that we don't want. When most people speak up in this way, they tend to speak up in anger. Very often, they keep allowing the disliked behavior over and over and over again until they simply can't take it anymore and they explode into an attack. Needless to say, this isn't a very good or healthy way to do it. Instead, we should get into the habit of speaking up at the first opportunity when we experience someone behaving in ways that we don't like. If the thing they did wasn't big and dramatic, it also shouldn't be hard to do it politely and with a smile, to make a simple request rather than an aggressive attack. And again, we tell them what we need and why we need it. So if a colleague of yours borrows something from your desk without asking, and you decide that you don't like that, you don't have to come at them with anger and accusations. You can simply say something along the lines of, "Hey, could you please ask me before you borrow things from my desk? I tend to get very distracted and completely lose my momentum if I notice that something is unexpectedly missing." In other words, show and tell is about preemptively showing or telling people how you would like for them to treat you, and about adjusting people's behavior as soon as you can when you experience behavior that you don't like. When you do, you'll reaffirm for your unconscious that you are a person that you value highly enough to take care of. And as an extra bonus, you'll soon have nothing but people in your life who treats you the way you want to be treated. And remember, if there are people in your life who are not willing to treat you the way that's right for you, those people aren't right for you. Don't be afraid of moving away from those relationships, because not having them in your life frees up space, time, and energy for people who will fit you better. And as we've already talked about, when you actually show the world who you truly are, you will start to attract the right kind of people more often. Okay, so whether you watch this whole course in a sitting or two from start to finish, or taking your time to watch it chapter by chapter over a longer period of time, you have just been given a whole lot of information. For many, the challenge now becomes to not just remember and use the information, but to get to the place of understanding and seeing it as one whole thing rather than lots of little pieces. Because the truth is that all the pieces that you've now learned fit together. The knowledge and exercises in these videos are all small parts that, when put together, makes the whole of healthy self-esteem. But here's the good news. You don't have to remember all of it. You don't even have to see just yet how they all fit together. The only thing you have to do if you want this course to help create healthy self-esteem is to practice what I've preached. Because simply listening to me and hoping that my words will create massive change is probably not going to work all that well. Don't get me wrong. If you have had any aha moments from anything of the stuff that we talked about, anything that made you excited, pleasantly surprised, feel good, and so on, odds are that some things have already changed. Because that aha feeling, which is what we call an insight, usually comes from your unconscious mind installing a new understanding or a new belief. And that's likely to help you as you move forward. That alone, though, is not going to be as effective as if you take the time to actually work on the things you've learned. So if you haven't already, I recommend, actually, I insist that you start watching the course a video or two at a time. Watch until you get to information or exercises that you're not already using in your everyday life. Then start practicing that. And keep practicing until it becomes so second nature that you no longer have to remember to practice it. When that happens, move on to the next piece of knowledge or the next exercise and do it again. By the time you've worked your way through all the content of this course that is valuable to you, I have zero doubt that you will have seen lots of amazingly positive change to your self-esteem. As we talked about, you deserve the things you create for yourself. So the only thing keeping you from having the self-esteem that you want is the time and effort it will take to accept these new beliefs and practice these exercises. And if you want any help along the way, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can post any questions or experiences in my Facebook group or even message me directly, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. All right, now let's get to the last and final part of this course, the bonuses you get for finishing it. The most valuable resource that comes with this course is probably my Facebook group, which, if you haven't joined already, you can join by typing fb.tjguttormson.com into your browser. In the group, I give full and detailed answers to any questions asked or experiences shared by the members. I post free new content several times a week, We have lots of fun discussions and conversations, and I even do the occasional free webinar and other such thing too. As a member, you also get to influence which courses I make next, because I always ask the group to vote for options and give me suggestions. In addition to that group, I want to offer you my other courses at significantly discounted prices. All you have to do to find the complete list, including all of the discounts, is to go to courses.tjguttormson.com. There, you'll find links to courses about topics like becoming authentically assertive and stop being a people pleaser, saying no, setting boundaries, all of this stuff. Social confidence and communication techniques that will help you create the conversations you want to have. How to make friends and create better social circles, conflict prevention and resolution, and more. I always make sure my courses complement each other well, so each course will enhance and build upon what you've learned in the others, so that you can take any or all of them without any confusion or complications. You'll also find more information about me and what I do, along with lots of free articles and videos, on my website, tjguttormson.com. And there's a few more videos over on my YouTube channel, which you'll get to via youtube.com/tjguttormson. And again, please, never hesitate to reach out if you have any questions at all. I absolutely love my job, and I love it when people post questions in my group, and I set aside time a couple of days a week to answer all the emails that I get from those who have taken any of my courses. So please reach out whether you just have a question, want to talk about my coaching or seminar, or anything else. Oh, and before I go, I would love to ask you for a quick favor. If you haven't already, I would greatly appreciate it if you left a review after finishing this video. A course's rating influences whether people sign up for it more than almost anything else, so they're very important, and I personally read and reply to every single one of them out of appreciation, so it would mean a lot to me. Okay, all that's left is to thank you so much for watching my course. It's thanks to you and others like you that I am able to keep doing this job I love so much and keep making these courses I have so much fun making. I hope our paths cross at some point, and if you ever happen to see me out in the real world, please come say hi. It would make my day. Thanks for watching.